Da, at 73, she felt useless until one stitch changed her life. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Patricia Nelson stood frozen in her living room, a plastic smile fixed on her face as colleagues raised champagne flutes in her direction. After 46 years as a pediatric nurse at Chicago Memorial Hospital, this retirement party should have felt like a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral for her identity. To Patricia, "May your golden years be as rewarding as the lives you've touched," called Dr. Winters, the hospital's chief of pediatrics. Patricia nodded graciously, though inside she was screaming. What was she without her white uniform, her comfortable shoes padding down hospital corridors, her hands expertly checking temperatures and soothing fevered brows? Just a 73-year-old woman in a world that had no use for her anymore. Her husband Martin squeezed her shoulder in what he meant as encouragement. He'd been retired for 8 years already, had settled comfortably into a routine of golf games and woodworking projects in the garage. He seemed genuinely happy puttering around their Chicago brownstone, content with his monthly lunch with former colleagues, satisfied with watching the world go by. "Aren't you excited to finally have time for yourself?" asked Nancy Chen, a young nurse Patricia had mentored. Her eager face shone with the certainty that retirement was some sort of prize Patricia had earned, like a gold watch or a cruise vacation. "Of course," Patricia lied, her voice steady from decades of practice calming anxious parents. "I have so many projects waiting." The truth was, she had nothing waiting. Nothing but empty days stretching before her like an endless corridor, with no patients to check on, no charts to review, no frightened children needing the special touch that had become her hallmark at Chicago Memorial. For nearly 5 decades, people had needed her. Now, overnight, they didn't. Later, after the last guest had departed, Patricia stood in her kitchen, mechanically washing champagne flutes, while Martin dozed in front of the television. Through the window, she could see lights flickering on in neighboring homes as families gathered for dinner, normal life continuing while hers had come to a screeching halt. Her fingers brushed against a flute, sending it crashing to the floor. As she knelt to pick up the shards, she caught her reflection in a piece of broken glass. Grey hair, lines etching her face, hands spotted with age. When had she become this person, this useless, obsolete woman with nothing to contribute? A tear splashed onto the broken glass, distorting her reflection further. For the first time since she was a young nurse, facing her first patient death, Patricia Nelson allowed herself to cry. The first month of retirement crawled by like a wounded animal. Patricia tried to fill her days with the activities that were supposed to satisfy retirees. She reorganized linen closets that didn't need reorganizing. She planted flowers in window boxes, though gardening had never particularly interested her. She watched daytime television until her eyes burned, the trivial problems of talk show guests and soap opera characters making her own purposelessness seem even more stark. Martin seemed bewildered by her restlessness. "You've earned this rest, Pat," he said repeatedly, as if repeating it enough would make her believe it. "Enjoy it." Her children called dutifully. David from Seattle, where he worked as a software engineer. Melissa from Boston, where she juggled a law practice and 2 teenagers. They asked polite questions about her newfound freedom, clearly, expecting enthusiastic responses about book clubs and volunteer work. Patricia gave them what they wanted, describing a contentment she didn't feel, knowing they had their own busy lives. She didn't want to burden them with the hollow feeling that had taken residence in her chest. "Mom, you sound great," Melissa said during their weekly Sunday call. "Retirement suits you." Patricia made appropriate noises of agreement. Then, quickly changed the subject to her granddaughter's soccer tournaments. After hanging up, she wandered through her quiet house, touching familiar objects. The framed photo of her nursing school graduation, the ceramic figurine David had made in 2nd grade, The wedding portrait, where she and Martin looked impossibly young. How had she become so unnecessary so quickly? The knock on her door came just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Eleanor Harper, her next-door neighbor for 20 years, stood on her porch, face pale with panic. "It's George," Eleanor gasped, referring to her husband. "He collapsed in the bathroom. I think it's his heart." Without thinking, Patricia grabbed her cardigan and followed Eleanor. Professional instincts took over. Check breathing, position. The patient, monitor pulse. She performed CPR until her arms ached, giving clear, calm instructions to Eleanor about when to call 911, what to tell the dispatcher. When the paramedics arrived, Patricia stepped back, suddenly conscious of her status. She was just a neighbor now, not a medical professional. She watched as they took over, using equipment more advanced than what she'd trained with, speaking a medical shorthand that was both familiar and foreign. "Are you family?" one paramedic asked her. "No, I'm just the neighbor," Patricia replied. The words tasting bitter, just the neighbor, not Nurse Nelson, not the pediatric nursing supervisor whose opinion had been sought by doctors with decades of experience, just an elderly neighbor who happened to be in the way. At the hospital, Patricia and Eleanor sat in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. Beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look ill, Patricia knew these rooms, had walked past them thousands of times on her way to pediatrics. Now she sat on the other side, powerless, waiting for someone else to provide information, to take action. Across the waiting area, a young woman paced with a screaming infant. The baby's face was red with exertion, tiny fists clenched, as the mother bounced and shushed with increasing desperation. Other waiting patients shot irritated glances in their direction. Without conscious thought, Patricia approached them. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. The mother looked up, exhaustion and weariness battling on her face. Then, with the universal desperation of a sleep-deprived parent, she handed over her child. Patricia cradled the infant with practiced ease, using a specific rocking motion she'd perfected over decades of soothing sick children. She hummed softly, her hand making small, firm circles on the baby's back. Within moments, the cries diminished to hiccups, then to silence as the baby's eyes drifted closed. "How did you do that?" the young mother whispered, tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. 46 years as a pediatric nurse," Patricia answered, a warmth spreading through her chest as she gently transferred the sleeping infant back. "Some things you never forget." As they continued waiting for news about George, Patricia found herself wandering the hospital corridors, muscle memory guiding her feet. She ended up at the gift shop, a small space filled with teddy bears, flowers, and balloons. In the corner, a display caught her eye, handmade baby blankets with delicate embroidery. The price tag made her eyes widen, $85 for something not much larger than a pillowcase. Patricia fingered the stitching, recognizing the technique her grandmother had taught her as a girl. The blankets were pretty but simple, nothing she couldn't have done herself once upon a time. When had she last picked up a needle? 30 years ago, 40? That night, after learning that George would recover, Patricia returned home and headed straight for the spare bedroom closet. Buried beneath old photo albums and outgrown winter coats, she found her sewing basket. The threads had dried out, the fabric scraps yellowed with age, but the needles remained, still sharp, still waiting. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. Patricia's first attempts at embroidery were frustrating. Her fingers, once nimble enough to insert IVs into the tiny veins of premature infants, now felt stiff and uncooperative. Arthritis made holding the needle painful after just a few minutes. The stitches that had once flowed easily from her hands now emerged crooked and uneven. "What are you doing?" Martin asked, finding her hunched over the kitchen table, surrounded by scraps of fabric and tangled thread. Trying to remember, Patricia replied without looking up. She didn't elaborate, and Martin, after hovering uncertainly for a moment, retreated to his workshop in the garage. For 3 days, Patricia practiced. She dug out old pattern books, reacquainting herself with stitches named after plants and animals. The lazy daisy, the French knot, the fishbone. She worked until her eyes strained and her fingers cramped, then soaked her hands in warm water, before beginning again. Gradually, muscle memory returned. The stitches grew more even, the patterns more complex. On the 4th day, she drove to a fabric store for the first time in decades. The overwhelming array of materials, fabrics, threads, tools she didn't recognize, nearly sent her retreating to her car. But the thought of returning to another empty day at home pushed her forward. "Can I help you find something?" asked a young clerk with purple hair and multiple ear piercings. Patricia hesitated. "I need supplies for a baby blanket. Something special." The clerk, Zoe, according to her name tag, led Patricia through the store, pulling down bolts of soft flannel, suggesting complementary embroidery floss colors, demonstrating tools that hadn't existed in Patricia's sewing days. To Patricia's surprise, Zoe showed genuine interest when she mentioned the techniques her grandmother had taught her. "That's amazing! Nobody does hand embroidery anymore. It's all machine work now. Could you show me sometime?" The request startled Patricia. When was the last time anyone had asked her to teach them anything? In her final years at the hospital, she'd felt increasingly irrelevant as younger nurses relied more on technology and less on the hands-on techniques she'd mastered. "I'm quite rusty," she demurred. "Still better than me," Zoe said cheerfully. "I can't even sew on a button." Patricia left the store with bags of supplies and something she hadn't expected, a sense of possibility. That evening, she began work on a proper baby blanket, soft cream-colored flannel with a border of embroidered woodland creatures. She worked steadily, losing track of time as she focused on each careful stitch, each tiny detail of foxes and rabbits taking shape beneath her fingers. A week later, the blanket was complete. Patricia wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and drove to Chicago Memorial Hospital. The familiar parking garage, the walkway she'd traversed thousands of times, being back felt both natural and foreign, like visiting a childhood home now occupied by strangers. At the reception desk, she asked directions to the maternity ward, a department she'd rarely had occasion to visit during her years in pediatrics. The volunteer at the desk gave her a visitor's badge without recognizing her. Just another gray-haired lady, indistinguishable from the dozens who came bearing gifts for new grandchildren every day. The maternity ward was quieter than pediatrics, the lighting softer, the atmosphere one of tired joy rather than anxious concern. Patricia approached the nurse's station hesitantly. "I'd like to donate this," she said, unwrapping the blanket, "for a baby who might need something special." The charge nurse, Dana, according to her badge, took the blanket with professional courtesy that shifted to genuine admiration as she examined the handiwork. "This is exquisite," Dana said, fingers tracing the tiny embroidered fox. "Did you make this?" Patricia nodded, unexpected pride warming her face. "We have a preemie in the NICU whose mother hasn't been able to provide anything for her yet," Dana said. "She's a single mom, no family support. Would it be all right if we gave this to her?" "That would be perfect," Patricia replied. Dana hesitated, then asked, "Do you make these regularly? We always need special items for our NICU babies. The hospital provides basic supplies, but something handmade. It means so much to the parents." Patricia found herself promising to return with more blankets, the words tumbling out before she'd consciously decided. As she walked back to her car, her step was lighter than it had been since her retirement party. She had a purpose again. Not the same purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. As the autumn days shortened into winter, Patricia established a new routine. Mornings were for coffee with Martin, reading the newspaper and planning her projects. Afternoons and evenings were devoted to needlework. Her dining room became a studio, fabric and thread organized in clear containers, patterns and sketches pinned to a corkboard she'd installed on the wall. Martin, after initial confusion, supported her newfound passion in his quiet way. He built her a custom lap desk that reduced strain on her back during long sewing sessions. He drove her to fabric stores without complaint, and most importantly, he listened as she explained techniques and designs, showing genuine interest in this aspect of his wife he'd never fully seen before. Each week, Patricia delivered new blankets to the hospital. Dana introduced her to the NICU nurses, who soon began requesting specific designs for particular babies. Stars and moons for a boy born during a meteor shower, butterflies for a girl named after her grandmother's garden. On her fourth visit, Dana made an unexpected suggestion. "We're having a budget meeting next week. The hospital administration is looking for places to cut costs, and the NICU Comfort Program is on the list." Patricia remembered the program from her own days at Chicago Memorial. It provided special items for families of critically ill infants, things not medically necessary but emotionally valuable. Keepsake boxes, photography sessions, memory books. "What does that have to do with me?" Patricia asked. "I mentioned your blankets to my supervisor. She wondered if you'd consider becoming an official volunteer, creating custom blankets as part of the program. It would help us justify keeping the budget if we could show we have skilled volunteers contributing." The word skilled echoed in Patricia's mind. When was the last time anyone had used that word to describe her? Not at her retirement party, where the speeches had focused on her past contributions, her well-deserved rest, as if her abilities had expired along with her employment contract. "I'd be honored," she said. What began as a weekly delivery of blankets soon expanded. Patricia created matching caps for the blankets. She designed small embroidered patches that could be attached to the isolettes in the NICU, adding color to the sterile medical environment. She worked with child life specialists to create comfort items for siblings of hospitalized infants, helping them feel connected to babies they couldn't always visit. Will the mother of the premature baby appreciate Patricia's handmade blanket, or will she reject this gesture from a stranger? Patricia anxiously waited by the phone, hoping for some word about how her gift had been received. When Dana finally called with news that the mother had burst into happy tears upon receiving the blanket, Patricia felt a surge of purpose that had been missing since she'd turned in her hospital ID badge. This connection, creating something, with her hands that brought comfort to others, was rekindling a spark she'd feared extinguished forever. One cold December afternoon, Patricia received an unexpected call from Zoe, the purple-haired clerk from the fabric store. "I hope you don't mind that I got your number from your customer file," Zoe began. "The thing is, my manager has been looking for someone to teach a beginner's needlework class. Our regular instructor moved to Florida. When I mentioned meeting you, she wondered if you'd be interested." Patricia's first instinct was to refuse, teaching strangers at her age. But then she thought of the young mother in the waiting room, of Dana's respectful requests for specific designs, of the renewed sense of purpose she'd found in creating something valuable. "I've never taught formally," she hedged. "It's just a small group, very casual," Zoe assured her. "Saturday mornings, 8 to 10 students maximum, beginning embroidery techniques. You'd be perfect." Perfect. Another word that hadn't been applied to her in a long time. "Let me think about it," Patricia said. That evening, she discussed the offer with Martin over dinner. To her surprise, he was enthusiastically supportive. "You should do it, Pat. You light up when you talk about your hospital projects. Why not share what you know?" "Because I'm 73 years old," Patricia replied. "Those students will take one look at me and see a doddering old lady." Martin reached across the table to take her hand, his expression unusually serious. "What I see is the woman who saved our neighbor's life with CPR. The woman who creates beautiful things that comfort sick babies and their parents. The woman who has more energy and purpose now than in the years before retirement." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Age is just a number, Pat. Your skills are ageless." The following Saturday, Patricia stood nervously before a table in the fabric store's classroom space. 8 women of varying ages looked back at her with expressions ranging from eager interest to bland politeness. Patricia had prepared meticulously, with sample pieces showing different techniques, handouts she'd created on Martin's computer, and individual kits of supplies for each student. "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Patricia Nelson, and I'll be teaching this introduction to embroidery. I learned these techniques from my grandmother when I was just 10 years old, and recently rediscovered the joy of needlework after retiring from nursing." As she demonstrated the first basic stitches, Patricia's nervousness faded. This wasn't so different from teaching new nurses how to insert an IV or change a complicated dressing. The rhythms of instruction, demonstrate, explain, assist, encourage, were familiar territory. By the end of the 2-hour session, her students were proudly displaying their practice pieces, and several had signed up for the following week's class. "You're a natural teacher," the store manager told her as she packed up her supplies. "Our previous instructor was knowledgeable but impatient. You take time with each student. 46 years of working with frightened children and anxious parents," Patricia replied with a small smile. "It teaches you patience." As winter deepened into January, Patricia's schedule filled. She taught 2 classes each week at the fabric store. She continued creating special items for the NICU, and she began receiving individual commissions. Word had spread among the hospital staff about her skill, and nurses and doctors approached her for custom baby gifts. The dining room studio expanded into the rarely used formal living room. Martin installed proper lighting and built storage shelves that lined one wall. Patricia invested in better tools, organized her growing collection of fabrics and threads, and subscribed to needlework magazines to study new techniques. One evening, as she worked on a particularly intricate christening gown, she realized that Martin was watching her from the doorway, a curious expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her work. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, moving to sit beside her, "that I've never seen you like this before. Even when you loved your nursing work, it didn't make you glow the way this does." Patricia considered his words. "Nursing was my calling," she said finally. "It was important work, and I was good at it. But it was also emotional labor, holding space for fear and pain and grief, day after day. This," she gestured to her embroidery hoop, "is creation instead of caretaking. It uses a different part of me." Martin nodded. "You seem lighter, more yourself." "I feel more myself," Patricia admitted. "When I retired, I thought I'd lost my purpose. Turns out I just needed to find a new one." Martin took her hand, his weathered skin against hers, a familiar comfort. "I'm proud of you, Pat. You didn't just accept what retirement was supposed to be. You created your own version." That night, Patricia lay awake long after Martin's breathing had settled into soft snores. She felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow held possibilities beyond routine. There were projects waiting, skills to perfect, people who valued what she could create. For the first time since her retirement party, Patricia fell asleep, looking forward to the morning. The unexpected email arrived in February, forwarded by Dana from the NICU. A local news station was doing a feature on community volunteers, making a difference in healthcare. And the hospital had suggested Patricia's custom blankets for premature babies. Would she be willing to be interviewed? Patricia's first reaction was refusal. She didn't need public recognition. The grateful smiles of new parents were reward enough. But Dana gently persisted, explaining how such publicity could help secure funding for the Comfort program, potentially expanding it to other departments. Besides, Dana added, your story might inspire other retirees who are struggling to find purpose. Not everyone discovers their second act as gracefully as you have. The interview took place in the hospital's atrium, Patricia seated with her, needlework in her lap, explaining how she'd transitioned from pediatric nurse to volunteer artisan. The young reporter seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about Patricia's techniques and the impact of handmade items on families experiencing medical crises. What would you say to someone who feels their useful years are behind them? The reporter asked as the interview concluded. Patricia considered carefully before answering. I'd say that usefulness doesn't expire with employment. The skills that made you valuable in your career, whether it's attention to detail, creative thinking, problem-solving, or compassion, those don't disappear when you retire. They're just waiting to be applied in new ways. The segment aired the following week. Patricia and Martin watched it together, Martin beaming with pride, while Patricia critiqued her posture and wished she'd worn a different sweater. By that evening, she'd received a dozen emails forwarded through the hospital's volunteer coordinator, people wanting to donate supplies, learn embroidery, or volunteer alongside her. Among the messages was one that stood out. Olivia Wilson, the curator of textile arts at the Chicago Cultural Center, had seen the news segment and was intrigued by Patricia's work. The center was planning an exhibition on contemporary fiber arts, focusing on artists who blended traditional techniques with modern applications. Would Patricia consider submitting pieces for consideration? They think I'm an artist, Patricia said incredulously, showing the email to Martin. You are an artist, he replied matter-of-factly. Have you looked at what you've been creating? It's not just craft, Pat. It's art. Patricia shook her head. I'm a retired nurse who does needlework. Hardly museum quality? Why don't you let the curator decide that? Martin suggested. What's the harm in showing her your work? The meeting with Olivia Wilson was scheduled for the following week. Patricia spent days selecting pieces that showcased various techniques, agonizing over which items best represented her work. In the end, she brought a small collection, the christening gown with its intricate whitework, a wall hanging she'd created for the pediatric waiting area depicting Chicago's skyline in vibrant colors, and photographs of her NICU projects. Olivia, a brisk woman in her 50s with a sleek silver bob, examined each piece with professional scrutiny, asking questions about technique, inspiration, and process. Patricia answered hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence as she realized. Olivia's interest was genuine. Your work bridges several worlds, Olivia said finally. It's technically accomplished, showing mastery of traditional methods, but it's also deeply functional, created for specific purposes and people, and there's a narrative quality. Each piece tells a story about connection and care. Patricia hadn't thought of her work in those terms before. She'd simply been creating things that felt meaningful, using skills that gave her satisfaction. I'd like to include 3 pieces in our exhibition, Olivia continued, and I'd be interested in commissioning a new work specifically for the show, something that represents your journey from medical professional to textile artist. Artist. The word still felt foreign, applied to herself, but as Olivia outlined her vision for the exhibition, Patricia found herself warming to the idea. Perhaps there was artistic merit in work created from experience, skill, and heart, even if it hadn't emerged from formal training or conscious artistic intent. I'd be honored, she said finally. Walking to her car after the meeting, Patricia felt slightly dazed. In less than a year, she'd gone from feeling obsolete to having her work considered for a museum exhibition. not because she'd set out to become an artist, but because she'd simply followed what brought her joy and meaning. Have you ever felt useless after a major life change? Or do you know someone who has experienced a similar feeling of loss of purpose? Share your story in the comments below. Spring arrived with a burst of energy that matched Patricia's expanding world. Her classes at the fabric store had grown so popular that the manager asked her to add an advanced session for students who had mastered the basics. The hospital's volunteer coordinator requested a meeting to discuss establishing a formal program where skilled retirees could contribute through arts and crafts. And Patricia had begun work on her commissioned piece for the Cultural Center exhibition. The new commission challenged her in unexpected ways. Rather than creating something purely decorative or functional, she was attempting to express complex emotions and experiences through fabric and thread. She worked on it in private, not even showing Martin her progress, as she experimented with techniques and materials she'd never used before. One afternoon, while gathering supplies for her advanced class, Patricia encountered a young woman in the fabric store, studying embroidery hoops with a perplexed expression. "Those are for holding fabric taut while you work," Patricia offered, helpfully. "Different sizes for different projects." The woman looked up with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I'm completely lost here. My grandmother used to embroider beautiful tablecloths, and I wanted to try learning, but I don't even know where to start." "I teach a beginner's class on Saturday mornings," Patricia said, handing the woman a flyer from her purse. "We cover all the basics." The young woman, Rachel, she introduced herself, brightened. "That would be perfect. My grandmother taught me a few stitches when I was little, but she passed away before I was old enough to really learn. I'd love to connect with that part of my heritage." As they chatted, Patricia learned that Rachel worked as a social media consultant, helping small businesses establish online presences. When Patricia mentioned her hospital volunteer work, Rachel's professional interest sparked. "Have you ever considered sharing your creations online? There's a huge community of crafters who would love to see your work, especially with the meaningful connection to helping NICU babies." Patricia laughed. "I barely manage email. Social media is beyond me." Rachel studied her thoughtfully. "What if I helped you set up a simple page, just to share photos of your work and maybe connect with other needlework enthusiasts? No obligation. But it might open some new doors." Under normal circumstances, Patricia would have politely declined. She had no desire for internet fame or additional complications in her life. But something about Rachel's enthusiasm and the genuine connection over shared interest in a traditional craft made her pause. "Why don't you come to Saturday's class?" Patricia suggested. "See if you enjoy it. We can talk more about this social media idea afterward." Rachel became not only a dedicated student, but also Patricia's unexpected guide to the online world. After class each Saturday, they would spend an hour at the coffee shop next door, with Rachel patiently explaining concepts like hashtags, followers, and digital branding. With Rachel's assistance, Patricia established a simple profile on a crafting platform, posting weekly photos of her completed projects. To Patricia's astonishment, her work attracted immediate attention. Other embroidery enthusiasts commented on her techniques. Young mothers requested custom pieces. Several followers asked if she would consider selling patterns or kits for her designs. "See, I told you there was an audience for this," Rachel said triumphantly, scrolling through the comments on Patricia's latest post. A series of growth chart wall hangings she'd created for the pediatric ward. "I never imagined anyone beyond my immediate circle would care about my little hobby," Patricia admitted. Rachel fixed her with a serious look. "First, it's not little. The work you create is significant, both in skill and in impact. Second, people are drawn to authenticity and purpose. Your creations have both." That conversation planted a seed. With Rachel's ongoing guidance, Patricia began to see possibilities beyond her current volunteer work and teaching. She could reach more people, share her techniques more widely, perhaps even create resources for others who found themselves at a similar crossroads in life. One evening, as she and Martin enjoyed dinner on their back patio, Patricia broached the subject that had been simmering in her mind. "I'm thinking about expanding what I'm doing with the needlework," she said carefully. "Not just teaching in person and creating pieces for the hospital, something bigger." Martin set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What are you envisioning?" "Rachel thinks I could create online tutorials, develop kits that people could purchase to make their own versions of my designs, maybe even write a small book about rediscovering creativity after retirement." She waited for his reaction, half expecting gentle discouragement about taking on too much at her age. Instead, Martin's face lit with enthusiasm. "That sounds perfect for you, Pat. You've always been happiest when you're teaching and creating simultaneously, and you have a unique perspective to share." His unwavering support touched her deeply. Throughout their 48 years of marriage, Martin had been a steady presence, but they had largely operated in separate spheres. She in her medical career, he in his engineering work. This new chapter had brought them into closer collaboration than ever before, as Martin helped with the practical aspects of her growing endeavors. "It would mean converting the guest bedroom into a proper studio," Patricia said, "with lighting for video recording, storage for inventory if I start selling kits." "David and Melissa stay in hotels when they visit anyway," Martin pointed out practically. "And it's not like we need to preserve a shrine to our previous lives. This is our life now." Our life, Patricia thought. Not just her new passion, but something they were building together in this unexpected season. "When did you get so wise?" she asked, reaching for his hand across the table. Martin's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I've always been wise. You've just been too busy saving lives to notice." The expansion of Patricia's needlework enterprise from personal hobby to structured business happened gradually through the summer months. Rachel helped her establish a proper website where she could sell patterns and tutorial access. Martin renovated the guest bedroom into a studio with professional lighting and organized storage. Their granddaughters, visiting from Boston during school break, helped package the first shipment of beginner embroidery kits that would be sold through a local yarn shop. "Grandma, are you becoming an influencer?" 16-year-old Emma asked teasingly as they tied ribbons on small boxes containing hoops, thread, and pre-printed fabric. "Hardly," Patricia laughed. "Just an old nurse who found a new way to help people. By teaching them to make pretty things," 13-year-old Sophie asked, examining one of Patricia's finished pieces with genuine admiration. Patricia considered the question seriously. "By showing them that creating something with your hands can be healing. That patience and precision lead to beauty. That age doesn't limit your ability to learn new skills or share what you know." Emma looked up from her packaging. "That's actually pretty deep, Grandma." "Old people occasionally have profound thoughts," Patricia replied dryly. "One of the few benefits of aging." As her small business grew, Patricia maintained her hospital volunteer work, considering it the heart of her endeavors. The impact of her handmade items on families experiencing medical crises remained her primary motivation. Everything else, the classes, the online tutorials, the exhibition piece, stemmed from that central purpose of creating comfort through craft. The true test of her new path came in late August, when unexpected pain in her hands forced her to see a doctor. The diagnosis was unsurprising but devastating: advanced arthritis, exacerbated by the repetitive motions of her needlework. "You'll need to significantly reduce your handicrafts," the rheumatologist advised. "I can prescribe anti-inflammatories and recommend physical therapy, but continuing at your current pace will only worsen the condition." Patricia sat in stunned silence, staring at the X-rays showing the deterioration in her finger joints. After finding her second act, would she lose it so quickly? "Is there any alternative?" Martin asked, his hand steady on Patricia's shoulder. "We can explore various assistive devices," the doctor replied, "and there are different techniques that might put less strain on the affected joints. But ultimately, this is a degenerative condition. Management rather than cure is our goal." That evening, Patricia sat in her studio, surrounded by the tools and materials that had given her renewed purpose, and allowed herself a rare moment of self-pity. The universe seemed to be playing a cruel joke, showing her a path forward, only to block it with physical limitations. Martin found her there, staring at her hands as if they had betrayed her. Wordlessly, he sat beside her, taking those same hands gently in his. "We'll figure this out," he said simply. "You've never been one to give up when obstacles appear." Patricia met his eyes, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. "No," she agreed. "I haven't." The following weeks became a period of adaptation and innovation. Patricia researched ergonomic tools designed for artisans with dexterity issues. She experimented with different postures and supports that reduced strain on her hands. She consulted with an occupational therapist who specialized in helping artists with physical limitations continue their work. Most significantly, she began designing her own adaptive tools when existing options proved inadequate. Using Martin's workshop and his engineering expertise, they created prototypes of needle holders that distributed pressure differently, hoops with modified grips, and a frame system that required less manual tension. "These could help other people with similar issues," Martin observed, as they refined a particularly effective needle grip. "Not just aging crafters, but people with various disabilities who want to work with their hands." Patricia looked up from testing the device. "You're right, we should share these designs." The setback that had initially seemed like the end of her journey became an unexpected turning point. Patricia's custom adaptive tools began attracting attention beyond the needlework community. A local makerspace invited her to present a workshop on designing for accessibility. An online forum for disabled artists featured her innovations, and a small manufacturer of specialty craft tools expressed interest in producing her designs commercially. Is there a connection between physical and spiritual healing? Has anyone else made this discovery? I wonder if there's someone watching this who knows exactly what I'm talking about. As autumn approached, bringing with it the opening date for the textile exhibition, Patricia focused on completing her commissioned piece. The arthritis made progress slower than she'd hoped, but her adaptive tools allowed her to work for short periods without excessive pain. The piece was evolving into something more complex than she'd initially envisioned. A wall hanging depicting intertwined hands of different ages, from infant to elderly, rendered in varied textiles and embroidery techniques. "It's about connection across generations," she explained to Martin as he helped her mount the nearly finished piece on its frame. "The medical knowledge I passed to younger nurses, the needlework my grandmother taught me that I'm now teaching others, the adaptive tools we're creating that might help future crafters. It's beautiful," Martin said simply, but the pride in his eyes spoke volumes. The week before the exhibition opening, Patricia received an unexpected email from an address she didn't recognize. The sender identified herself as Elena Martinez, founder of a women's shelter on Chicago's South Side. Elena explained that she'd seen Patricia's interview on the local news and had been following her online tutorials. "Many of our residents are immigrant women with extraordinary textile skills from their home countries," Elena wrote. "These talents have no outlet here, and watching your videos has inspired several of them to suggest starting a craft group. Would you consider visiting our shelter to meet these amazing artisans? They have so much to share, but lack connections in their new home. Patricia sat back, considering the request. Her schedule was already full with teaching, hospital volunteering, and preparations for the exhibition. But something about Elena's message resonated deeply. These women had skills that were going unrecognized, just as Patricia had felt her own talents were obsolete after retirement. After consulting with Martin, Patricia arranged to visit the shelter the following week. She packed samples of her work and basic supplies, unsure what to expect, but curious about the intersection of different needlework traditions. The shelter occupied a renovated school building, its institutional exterior belying the warm, supportive environment inside. Elena greeted Patricia at the entrance and led her to a common room where 7 women waited, ranging in age from early 20s to 60s. Despite language barriers, some spoke limited English, relying on others to translate. Their shared interest in textiles created immediate connection. As the women brought out examples of their work, Patricia's admiration grew. Intricate lacework from Romania, bold geometric embroidery from Guatemala, delicate beadwork from Ethiopia. These weren't just crafts. They were cultural heritage, preserved through skilled hands, carried across oceans and borders. "Your work is extraordinary," Patricia told them sincerely, "far more advanced than anything I create." "But you have what we don't have," said Nadia, a middle-aged Ukrainian woman whose cross-stitch depicted traditional folk patterns. "You have connections, a platform, people who value what you make." That observation sparked an idea that would transform Patricia's vision yet again. By the end of the visit, they had outlined a plan for collaborative workshops where the shelter residents would teach their traditional techniques to Patricia's students, while Patricia would help them establish connections with local shops and galleries interested in ethical, handmade items. "It's a cultural exchange," Patricia explained to Martin that evening. "These women get to share their skills and potentially earn income from their work. My students learn authentic techniques from master artisans, and we all benefit from the cross-cultural connection." Martin listened, then asked the practical question that had become his role in their partnership. "How can I help make this happen?" Together, they worked out the logistics. Martin would transport the women from the shelter to the fabric store for special workshops. Patricia would create bilingual handouts documenting the techniques, preserving them for future learners. They would establish a co-op structure where proceeds from sold items would go directly to the artisans, with a percentage supporting the shelter's programs. The first collaborative workshop took place just days after the exhibition opening at the Cultural Center. Patricia's commissioned piece had received favorable attention from critics who praised its technical skill and emotional resonance. But the real highlight for Patricia was introducing her regular students to Nadia and Carmen, who demonstrated Ukrainian cross-stitch and Guatemalan backstrap weaving respectively. The session proved so popular that the store manager immediately requested a regular series. Word spread through Chicago's crafting community about the unique opportunity to learn authentic techniques from international artisans. What began as a single workshop evolved into a monthly cultural exchange program, with waiting lists for each session. For the shelter residents involved, the program provided more than potential income. It offered recognition of their skills, connection with the broader community, and a chance to preserve and share cultural traditions they feared might be lost. For many, it was the first time since arriving in America that they felt truly valued for their knowledge, rather than pitied for their circumstances. Patricia found herself in a new role, not teacher, but facilitator, creating space for these skilled women to shine. Her home studio became a planning center where she and the artisans designed future workshops, photographed techniques for tutorials, and developed marketing materials for their collaborative products. The journey from retirement to this unexpected leadership position had been circuitous but fulfilling. Patricia no longer questioned her value or purpose. Both were evident in the flourishing programs she'd helped establish, the connections forged across cultures and generations, the skills preserved and shared. As the holiday season approached, Patricia faced her biggest challenge yet. The collaborative workshops had attracted the attention of a luxury department store's buyer who proposed a pop-up shop featuring handmade items from the shelter artisans, with Patricia's work as the centerpiece. The financial opportunity was significant, not just for Patricia, but for the women whose work would be showcased alongside hers. However, the terms included an exclusivity clause that would require Patricia to pause her hospital donations and community classes during the 3-month contract. The financial security was tempting, especially as her adaptive tools and modified techniques still limited her productivity. But the thought of abandoning the foundational elements of her second act, the hospital program that had given her renewed purpose, the affordable classes that made needlework accessible to everyone, left her uneasy. For 3 nights, Patricia and Martin discussed the opportunity from every angle. The practical benefits were obvious: financial security, wider recognition for the shelter artisans, potential for future collaborations at this prestigious level. The costs were equally clear, temporarily setting aside the community-focused work that had restored Patricia's sense of purpose after retirement. "What would make you proudest a year from now?" Martin asked on the 3rd evening, cutting through the circles of their discussion. "Having your work featured in a luxury store, or continuing to build these community connections?" Put that way, the answer was clear. Patricia declined the exclusivity clause while suggesting an alternative, a smaller collection that wouldn't interfere with her existing commitments. To her surprise, the buyer agreed, impressed by Patricia's integrity and community focus. This decision marked a turning point in how Patricia viewed her work. No longer was it simply a hobby that had grown into a business. It was a platform for connection, for preserving cultural heritage, for making traditional skills accessible across generations and backgrounds. The financial aspects mattered, but they weren't the primary motivation. As winter settled over Chicago, Patricia's network of needleworkers continued to expand. The hospital program grew to include other departments beyond the NICU. The collaborative workshops with shelter residents became so popular they moved to a larger venue. The adaptive tools Patricia and Martin had designed were being produced by a small manufacturer, with a portion of proceeds supporting arts programs for people with disabilities. On a snowy afternoon in January, Patricia sat in her studio, taking a rare moment of rest between projects. Her hands ached despite the ergonomic tools and medications, a constant reminder of the physical limitations that shaped this chapter of her life. Yet the pain seemed a small price for the richness she'd discovered after that bleak retirement party just 1 year earlier. The ringing phone interrupted her reflection. It was Olivia from the Cultural Center calling with an unexpected invitation. The American Textile Arts Association was holding their annual conference in Chicago that spring, and they wanted Patricia to deliver a keynote address on finding purpose through traditional crafts in modern life. Me, a keynote speaker? Patricia's surprise was genuine. "I'm not an academic or a renowned artist, just a retired nurse who rediscovered an old skill." "That's precisely why they want you," Olivia explained. "Your journey resonates with people because it's authentic. You've bridged medical care and textile arts, traditional techniques and modern applications, personal fulfillment and community service. That's a powerful narrative in a world where many struggle to find meaning in retirement." After hanging up, Patricia sat with the invitation, feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Public speaking had never been her favorite part of nursing, though she'd done her share of presentations at medical conferences. But addressing hundreds of textile artists and academics seemed entirely different. Yet as she considered the opportunity, Patricia recognized it as a chance to amplify the message that had emerged from her own experience. That purpose could be discovered in unexpected places, that traditional skills retained relevance in contemporary life, that connection across cultures and generations could be fostered through shared creative practices. Martin's reaction when she told him that evening was unsurprising. "Of course you'll do it," he said matter-of-factly. "You have something valuable to share, and I'll be right there in the audience, probably embarrassing you by telling everyone. I'm your husband." Patricia laughed, then grew serious. "Did you ever imagine, when I was moping around after retirement, that we'd end up here? That I'd be giving keynote speeches and running collaborative workshops with artisans from around the world?" Martin considered the question. "I always knew you were capable of remarkable things," he said finally. "I just didn't know what form they'd take in this chapter of our lives. But watching you discover this new path has been one of the great joys of my life." His words touched her deeply. Their marriage had always been solid, a foundation she could rely on through the demands of her nursing career and the challenges of raising children. But this new collaboration, with Martin's practical support enabling Patricia's creative vision, had added unexpected dimensions to their relationship in what society often dismissed as the twilight years. As the conference date approached, Patricia worked on her keynote address between other projects. Rather than focusing solely on her personal journey, she decided to collaborate with the women from the shelter, incorporating their stories of preserving cultural heritage through traditional crafts. She arranged for several of them to join her on stage, demonstrating techniques while she spoke about the power of intergenerational and cross-cultural exchange. The most ambitious element of her presentation would be the unveiling of a collaborative quilt created specifically for the conference. Over 80 artisans contributed squares, ranging from beginners in Patricia's classes to master craftspeople from the shelter, from children in hospital programs to elderly residents in assisted living facilities where Patricia now taught monthly sessions. Each square represented the maker's cultural background and personal story, creating a visual tapestry of connection through craft. On the morning of the conference, Patricia stood backstage, watching the audience file into the auditorium. Textile artists, academics, students, craft enthusiasts, all gathered to explore the intersection of traditional techniques and contemporary applications. Martin sat in the front row, giving her a thumbs up when he caught her eye. As the moderator introduced her, highlighting her unusual journey from pediatric nurse to textile artist and community builder, Patricia took a deep breath. She stepped onto the stage not as someone seeking purpose, but as someone who had found it in an unexpected place, in the simple act of threading a needle and creating something meaningful, one stitch at a time. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. As she looked out at the crowd, at young women clutching notebooks, at older women nodding in recognition of their shared journey, she realized she had never been useless. She had simply needed to thread a different needle. Her skills, her patience, her ability to teach and heal, these weren't confined to a hospital or a specific career. They were woven into the fabric of who she was, and they would remain valuable until her final stitch. The baby blanket she had created for her first grandchild now hung in a museum exhibition on contemporary textile arts. But more meaningful than any accolade was the circle of women who gathered in her living room each week, needles flashing in the sunlight, stories and laughter flowing as freely as tea, creating beauty one stitch at a time. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel,